8 years after the 9/11 attacks, most Americans recall the horrific images of the Twin Towers crumbling to the ground and black smoke pouring out the side of the Pentagon. But for some, it was the aftermath of 9/11 that wrote a dark chapter for American history. And looking back, experts reflect on the legacy of an administration still under fire for actions taken post 9/11.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
It was official. President Bush had declared a global war on terrorism. In response to 9/11, the Bush administration ushered in a new era of American politics and policies. Whether it was the controversial Patriot Act, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the interrogation program, or the politicization of government agencies and the rise of private security contractors, for the Bush administration, drastic times called for drastic measures.
What we did post 9/11 damaged our reputation and prestige and thus our real power in the world.
Looking back to the months following 9/11, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, the former chief of staff to former Secretary of State Colin Powell, recalls the permanent campaign of fear launched by the Bush administration, which he said led to the high demand for domestic and international intelligence through the torture interrogation program.
Into that politics of fear, just as in 1950 and 51 and 52, flowed politicians who were willing to take advantage of that politics of fear for their own political power.
Former CIA official Ray McGovern highlights the fabricated evidence, claims of weapons of mass destruction, and a sold mainstream media as helpful tools for the Bush administration to launch war against Iraq.
It's sort of like those weapons of mass destruction that were the greatest threat, but we couldn't find them. Where are these al-Qaeda cells? It's just that you get people whipped up, and then, of course, the key role played by the fawning corporate media, and you have the very delicate problem of a malnourished body politic with no moral guidance.
Experts also note the national surveillance of Americans through the country's law enforcement agencies, with the blessing of the Patriot Act and national security letters, violated constitutional rights. As there were thousands of victims who lost their lives on 9/11, there were also Americans who became the victims of post-9/11 policies.
American citizens, Muslims, when they come back home, they stop at the airport, question, laptops are taken, families are split, sometimes handcuffed and humiliated, all those type of things. And then the hysteria that comes about in terms of 9/11.
However, despite the critics, some in Washington saw the domestic and international policies as essential to securing America after 9/11.
I think we've struck the right balance, and indeed they kept us safe. There's not been another attack on American soil. And even in Iraq, after expenditure of much blood and treasure, things have improved tremendously.
Today, 8 years later, opinions toward how the Bush administration handled the response to 9/11 are mixed.
The Bush administration, I think, it responded appropriately at that time.
Going into war in the first place was inappropriate. We didn't have the evidence then. We now know that we don't have the evidence now.
People were really scared. It was a totally new experience. I think that it's sort of normal there was a bit of overreach, but I'm totally against those policies. I think that they are counterproductive ultimately.
The United States post 9/11 became a very different America for many people. Protests against the Iraq War were heavily surveillanced and infiltrated by government agents. Peace activists were placed on the FBI's terrorist watch list, and presidential signing statements eroded the checks and balances system set up by the U.S. Constitution. This will be the first time since September 11th America commemorates 9/11 without President Bush and his cabinet in charge. On the anniversary of the day, historians predict will shape his legacy. President George W. Bush and his second-in-command, Dick Cheney, will watch from the sidelines as the Obama administration, with its own agenda in revising the post-9/11 structure, pay homage to a tragic event that directly affected the lives of millions of people around the world. Jihan, Press TV, Washington.